My name is Jeremy Walton, and this is the cinematography of The Last of Us. Let's go! Yes, I'm doing another video on cinematography. I waited a bit to do this one because I wanted to get as much info together as possible before filming, and now here we are. I'll cover the basics as usual. At the end though, I do want to cover something I think the filmmakers did an excellent job on, so stick around for that. The show I'm talking about, which you already know, is the 2023 HBO series The Last of Us. We do have a bunch of directors and cinematographers on the show, and I'm going to bounce around between them depending on the topic. To start, I think we need to talk about the gear. We all like talking about this stuff, so let's start strong and get to camera and lens choices. If we hop over to IMDb Pro, we can see they chose the Arri Alexa Mini and Cooke S4 lenses, which would be a pretty popular choice. What I want to show you is the reasons behind the choices when they probably could have picked any camera or lens they wanted. One of the cinematographers, Evan Bolter, talks about why they went with the Alexa Mini. It's lightweight, small, good for handheld, and in my opinion, the Alexa has the best dynamic range to emulate a 35mm film look, unlike the shallow focus you get from large format or 65mm, which is the fashion right now. That's interesting when we talk about cinema. I've done a few videos about what is cinematic filmmaking, and people tend to think that means a shallow depth of field. We can see in other films like The Favorite, nominated for an Academy Award for Best Cinematography, use deep focus to tell their story, which took place in a grand castle. If you have other examples of deep focus, comment below and let me know. For The Last of Us, they didn't want that shallow depth of field, but what was their reasoning? Well, they wanted to be able to see the world, the environment, and what's happening all around us. There was a lot to show and worth showing it. It's almost its own character in the story. The Alexa captures a large amount of detail in the background, so you're not just getting out of focus blobs. Makes sense. This should show you it's not about getting the best camera and lenses. Even though these are the top, it's about finding the right tools that allow you to capture the story you want to tell. Now, we also have the lenses, which were the Cooke S4 lenses, and they have this Cooke look that people talk about. I actually like the look of Cooke lenses and tend to be drawn towards them, so if you watch certain movies and like a certain look, then as a filmmaker, you need to start looking up what equipment they use to get an idea of what you like and don't like. Another cinematographer who worked on episode 1 was Ksenia Sereda, and for her it was a simple choice when it came to lenses. I was looking for lenses where you can have this connection of the close-up and what you can see around in the environment. Now, why was she trying to have this connection with close-ups? That comes down to story. Part of the joy of the game is the interactivity with the characters, seeing action from their perspective. So for the TV show, we wanted to stay as close to them as possible, and that informed our choice of camera and lenses. This was done very intentionally and really made you feel part of the scene. Helping with that was the use of a 25mm to 50mm range, and the Cooke lenses weren't distorting the faces and had a very distinct focus plane. By the way, they also did tests. I've talked about this before. Yeah, they did their own tests, even though there's plenty of films using this equipment. When it comes to making their own choice, they didn't leave it up to what someone else said or did. You should do the same when buying cameras or lenses. I've also done videos on filters in film. I love a good filter for many reasons. Right now I'm using a black satin filter, but that's not always the case in film. Even though people talk about it a lot, like myself, it doesn't mean you have to use one to get a cinematic look. I love to work without filters too, and on the close-ups, I just could not take my eye off the portraits we could create with the light. The system of light, lens, and camera gave a very specific, textured, and warm image. This is all good stuff, and why I like making these videos. You can learn a lot from people doing the thing you want to do. Watch the pros, listen, learn, and if you do it enough, you'll see a pattern. People tend to speak a certain language and work in a way that might be a little different from what you're used to seeing. Now they have the camera, the lenses. How will they shoot it? If you guessed the majority of the series was handheld, then you'd be right. Handheld isn't anything new. We've seen it a lot, and we know we've seen it done to the point you can't even tell what's going on. The Last of Us was a controlled chaos. There's a difference between choosing handheld because you need to move quick and have no budget, compared to using it to tell your story in a way that makes sense. One great quote about this series that simplifies what they were doing was, "It's not a cliche zombie movie. It's not Hollywood backlit where everyone's close-up is perfect. It's a world of organic cinematic naturalism, and that's something I could just feel." Handheld fits in this situation, and to emphasize what they wanted, Bolter goes on to say, "It was a good decision because handheld gives things a documentary-style grounding. When you suddenly put a camera on a stick, it feels like a bit more artifice, so we generally defaulted to handheld unless there was a good reason to do something differently." Beyond the quotes, I mentioned controlled chaos. They used something called a ZeeGee, which really gave them control over the handheld look and made things easier for the operator. It really is an art form, and I think bad handheld over the years gave it a bad rap. Done right though, it works. Grounding it in reality, the scene feels like Saving Private Ryan. You're on the beach and you're not having to do slick crane moves because that scene doesn't need it. The Last of Us also had a unique look in this post-apocalyptic America with limited resources and power. They had 3 sources of light, which are daylight, moonlight, and fire to light the scenes, alongside some electricity, but that was just another element to ground everything in reality. Sometimes limitations can be your greatest strength. So they had to ask themselves a pretty straightforward question. How can we create an environment that feels completely real, feels like we just walked in, this is how it happened to be, and yet is completely controlled so we can shoot in it all day long and it's not going to be changing all day? One way to do this was, I wanted to lean into these imperfections and make the light feel dirty and mixed and messy and feral. A technique that was used is called skip lighting. It's something Bolter used and credits cinematographer Conrad Hall that used this style of lighting where you're not directly lighting the actors, but having the light bounce off the environment. This is used a lot throughout the series, and it shows there isn't a one way to light a scene. Let your story influence your ideas and techniques to make it that much better. If you're interested at all in what Conrad Hall has done, check out my video how to use hard cinematic lighting in film, and you can see some of these lighting techniques used in some great films. I also wanted to mention the flashlights. You might think it's a flashlight. Well, yeah, but that's your lighting or a main source for your scene. We tested all different types of flashlights to find ones that create the same experience for the viewer as the characters, that they're discovering things. I just want to point out they tested flashlights because it matters and it all boils down to story. The characters were discovering things and how that's being told, the story, dictated what flashlights they wanted to use. It's in the details and you can tell by all this information we have on the show. Speaking of details, let's finish on something that I have a love-hate relationship with. That is driving scenes. I love a good scene in a car, but hate when it looks fake. That means what's happening outside the windows and how the actors behave inside the car. For me, when it's done bad, it's bad. The Last of Us did a great job, and I think it was their approach to the process that made the difference. There were a couple things they had to consider, and one problem is the lack of options. First of all, there are only a few places the camera can be to see people's faces talking. It's very hard to be interesting visually, and it's very hard to innovate because everyone's tried everything, and certain things just work. What worked is the chemistry between Joel and Ellie. That comes down to the writing and acting. I always enjoyed those scenes, and the filmmakers knew they didn't have to make it complicated. They just had to let the actors do their thing and capture it. Now when it comes to continuity, that's a different story. As much as they wanted to be grounded in reality, they knew some of the driving scenes would have to be shot on a soundstage. Out on the road, they could set up cameras and let the action roll. It was all real and all good stuff to use. That's what I love. What makes driving scenes tough to watch is when everything is so perfect. We all drive in cars and know that's not real life. We all have to pull down the visor to block the sun. Well, that was the approach Bolter took. My philosophy to that, shooting on a soundstage, is to always introduce flaws. Because when we're out on the road, it's thumpier than you expect it to be. The light isn't quite in the perfect position. There are flaws and many things are happening that are faults if you like. So on a stage, you have to put those faults back in. That's something you probably don't hear too often. Put in the flaws, but it's exactly why I love it. From the choice of camera and lenses to how the scenes were lit, we see the same techniques and language about the story across the board in every department beyond what I talked about, and the results speak for themselves. I highly encourage you to have a look at films you like, read articles, watch interviews, because this might have an impact on the choices you make as a filmmaker. I really enjoyed The Last of Us and I'm looking forward to season 2. Maybe some things will change with its cinematography, and if it does, I'll make another video. Well, there you have it, the cinematography of The Last of Us. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hit that like button because there's definitely more on the way. Subscribe so you don't miss out. Leave a comment if you have questions. Until next time, it's a wrap.